Hey everyone, I have JT here with me today. Thanks, JT, for joining me. I wanted to do this interview. This is actually my very first live interview, so thanks for being my guinea pig.
I appreciate you being me being the first one to be asked.
Yeah, you helped me
Unless
get
let
this
somebody
all
else
set.
unless you ask somebody else and they said no.
Yeah. No, this is all good. This is how it was meant to be. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I sort of chickened out last time because I had Jana on and I was just not sure what to do. So, um,
Hmm.
yeah, second interview, but first live stream. So, I hope everyone enjoys it. Today, I really wanted to do kind of a not so much a deep dive, but just a conversation around the preterist perspective and how that differs from the little season perspective. And so I think something that maybe people, especially as they're coming into this topic from not knowing anything, and maybe from more of the dispensational perspective, what you've learned in church, which is kind of that futurist rapture perspective of the end times. I wanted to just give this little bit of a like something that people can really get their teeth into, but it's not too deep, but it just kind of separates like so full preterism would be um, kind of like you think everything's done and dusted. So everything happened by the 70 AD mark when Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. And that would kind of be the end of everything. So, in other words, Satan's in the lake of fire. The dead have all been resurrected and judgment's done and everything. And we live in the new heavens and the new earth now. And so that's kind of what I would say a full preterist would believe. Like it's all wrapped up. It's all, the New Jerusalem's here.
Hmm.
And then we have something which would probably be called partial preterism. Do you want to just explain maybe what that perspective would look like?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously some partial preterists would be like I would say that I mean, just for definition wise, I would say that little season people would probably fall in the partial preterist because we would say that we believe in a majority fulfillment in the book of Revelation. Or I mean, obviously partial preterist could mean you believe anything has been fulfilled in Revelation. But yeah, I mean, obviously I would say that little season folks would be partial preterists just based on the definition. I know we don't like that term and I don't like it either. But they're saying like that we don't believe that this is a new heaven and new earth, but we believe that a lot of things happen, including obviously the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, if that was the year. But whatever, maybe we can get into that in a little bit. But yeah, they believe parts of it have been fulfilled, but not all of it.
Okay. Yeah. And then I think there's a separation in kind of the more of the nuanced area, which is the literal versus spiritual. And so we can talk
Hmm.
about that a little bit too. So, I know there's people out there that would say kind of the new, like the heavens and the earth were more reflective of the nation of Israel, for example, or the temple. So those might be some
Hmm. The
nuances that,
covenants.
right. So there wouldn't be necessarily like the actual stars and the actual heaven, but yeah. So when it talks about fire, it's more like the destruction of that old covenant. Yeah.
Hmm. Mm.
Okay, so I guess what I want to do is just welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I want to let you all know that the one thing we don't want to do in this podcast is really talk about people specifically. We're not here to bash on anybody, and certainly we're not here to um, make this an us versus them. That's not the intention. It's more just like outlining the arguments and why certain things might be considered to be, say, fulfilled rather than like still outstanding in our future and vice versa. So I think that's just something I want to set the tone for because I don't want it to be like a nasty like, they believe this, how stupid are they? Like it's not that at all. Like we all have a lot to learn, and JT and I were just talking about there's always growth to be made, right? And especially as we study this, I think it's important to remain open to learning. So
Definitely.
so what I wanted to do was I'm going to just put the questions that I have on the screen. So I'm going to share a window here, and then we'll just talk through them. And then if there's anything, as the conversation goes, we can just kind of go with it. I'll just find the right screen here. Okay. So my first question for you is, how long is a little season? What are your thoughts on the length of a little season?
See, I think I probably differ on some people. I know some people get very specific because they believe the little season started in 1776, and they say, well, if 1,000 years is the millennial reign, well, a little season could be 250 years. Could be, but I mean, I think that the Bible obviously does not give a time. So to me, it's like the Bible says that Satan is released, and then he goes and deceives the nations, and then he gathers them for a battle against the camp of the saints. So how long does that take? I mean, I think that to me, it's kind of up to us, right? A little bit, right? Because if you think in the way that if God told Jonah to go tell Nineveh to repent because judgment was coming, and they repented, well, then God delayed the judgment. Later, we know if you continue to read, eventually they do get judged. But
Yeah.
the judgment was stayed. So if the people were had their hearts toward God, well, then it would take Satan longer. So it's like kind of how long that takes. It's kind of like how long did it take for Babylon to come to Jerusalem? Well, I mean, it took as long as it took for them to completely turn away from God, and then that happened. So I would say the little
Mhm.
season would be just like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that preterists kind of have a different view of that, right? Like they fit it into a very small time frame. So that would be like something like 3.5 years. Is that what you heard as well?
I don't know what they think about that. I think that's like I'm a little confused when they say that, oh, it all happened in 70 AD, and I'm like, well, like how did it all happen in 70 AD? I don't really understand what that even means because in my view, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 are talking specifically about the destruction of Jerusalem, and it really doesn't go much further than that. Like I think the Book of Revelation gives a more earth, the whole realm wide, it's talking about more than just Jerusalem. But like, so when you say like, well, if Jesus said everything happened in Matthew 24 before that generation passed away, well, he doesn't mention the destruction of the beast. He doesn't mention any of that stuff. He mentions tribulation and things like that. So I think they try to say, well, Matthew 24 is talking about all the book of Revelation, but I think if you read the two books, you would say no, because it talks about multitudes, many nations, and it talks about more than those books do. So I would say that
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why they say 1,000 years doesn't mean 1,000 years, and a little season means. I mean, I don't even know what they say.
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of refer to it as just a little while, and then they kind of use other references throughout scripture where it says, a little while to this, a little while to that, and they kind of use that to really say, well, it's as I mean, which is right. I mean, we don't really know how long it is, but yeah, they seem to give it a little bit more specific. At least what I was listening to sounded like more 3.5 years kind of time frame.
Well,
Um,
if you think about it, though, it's like so. I mean, obviously, I would say that you let Scripture interpret Scripture. If it says it's an allegory, it's a vision, then obviously you take that for what
yeah,
it's worth. But if specifically what I believe the millennial kingdom was, whether I'm sure we'll get into whether it was earthly, spiritual, or a combination of the two. But what we do know is that during that time, the devil is bound, so he cannot deceive the nations any longer. And
yeah,
so it mentions more than one time that it's 1,000 years. And then so obviously we know the promise to from God the Father to God the Son that he's going to be given dominion over these nations. Okay, so that makes sense that during that time the devil's bound, so then everyone can realize who the true king is. And then
mhm,
after that time, the devil has to go out and then deceive the people who believed in Jesus afterwards.
yeah,
Now, how does like that doesn't make sense in a very short time period. It makes sense that like it would take a little while for the gospel to spread in that kind of way that all the nations accepted that Christ was king. And
yeah,
then it would take a while for them to eventually turn away and be deceived.
yeah. Well, I heard actually that what they what they believe, or at least some of them, I don't want to speak for all of them, but the ones I've heard say that the little season was the Great Tribulation.
But that's, yeah, like I said, I don't follow. I mean, that doesn't really square because
I
the
know.
nations were kind of the devils at that point,
Yeah.
right? So I would say that the great tribulation is judging first Jacob and then the church, because that's what it
Yeah.
says in basically Revelation 12 is that the devil pursues the woman and then it pursues the woman's offspring,
Yeah.
right? So like the early church. And then
That's
after
right.
that, like that, so then eventually like they're given, obviously some are given wings to fly, they're given a place to be safe and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
not really about me because it's obviously during Revelation 13 it mentions that all the people in the world are going to serve the beast. So
Yeah.
like he's not deceiving, he doesn't need to deceive them. That's not, there's a they acceptance of Jesus and then there is a turning away afterwards. So like that's the part they're missing. It's like, so when do they all turn to Jesus and then turn away?
Yeah. Well, I the way I heard it was that they believe, or at least, again, I don't, when I say they, I'm just talking about the ones I've heard. So moving forward, that's what I mean. Um, so they believe that during Jesus' ministry, like at his temptation or even at the point where he died, was when the devil was bound. And then from there, it was like 3.5 years, and then another 3.5 years. So it would be like 3.5 years of Satan bound, and then 3.5 years of like millennial reign. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but they kind of compress everything in to this time scale. So in other words, they're kind of like bending the rules of time to make sure that it all happens by the end of 70 AD. That's kind of
It
how it.
sounds a lot like leaning on one's own understanding because I don't see. I don't see. I've heard what they say in the original Greek. 1,000 years does not mean 1,000 years. It means like an undetermined long amount of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if that's true, right? So if that's true, for one, it says 1,000 years twice. I mean, and I think that they use that word is used for 1,000 in other places in the Bible.
Yeah.
But for two, it's like it is a definite amount of time because we know that there's markers. It's like the devil's bound and then he's not bound anymore. So there's a certain amount of time of that.
Yeah.
So why not just be 1,000 years? Because
Exactly.
it does not fit into their idea that it all happened in a certain period. If it is 1,000 years, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's where they get into trouble. And so why is it 3.5 years? Beats me because I know that's not in there because it mentions that the Jacob's trouble, the time the Gentiles are given or the nations are given to trample on the holy city, is that a determined amount of time. It's very specific. It says it in Daniel and it says it in Revelation 11. How
Yeah.
much time is given for this to happen? Now, the other, where's the other 3.5 years that they're talking about? I don't think it's there unless unless you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. If it's somewhere I've not read it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think someone's mentioned here. Oh, by the way, Whisperjack is in the chat, one of my favorite channels. So, guys, you should go subscribe. Um, Thanks for joining. Yeah, so someone also mentioned the 40 years equals 1,000. So I think that's also another time play that they do. But yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's very confusing. And then the other thing is they talk about the surrounding of the camp of the saints in a really vague way. So if it all happened together, this kind of like everything's happening all at the same time, all of this prophecy is being fulfilled. Um, they start losing a little bit of credibility because, in my view anyway, there's this like, how do you surround the camp of the saints when they're told to flee, right? They're told to go like flee to the mountains and
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah. Mhm.
So like I just don't think it, I don't think it makes a lot of sense.
No, it does not. Yeah, so where's the camp of the saints that they surrounded and then got burned up by fire afterwards?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, I think that they allegorize some things that there's really no reason to allegorize. I don't
Yeah.
think. I mean, like, unless they said you can show me some other place, but I've even heard like the Gog Magog thing happened in the times of Esther. Okay, so I've heard that there was a place where it was named Gog and Magog, but I mean, it's clearly written in the book of Revelation that Gog Magog happens afterwards. So it can't
Yeah.
be in the times of Esther. It's like that does not fit the time. It's again,
No.
our God is not the God of confusion. He's not referencing the book of Esther.
That's right.
after the millennial reign. It's kind of crazy, I think, to even draw the two conclusions.
Yeah, I agree. So how long is 1,000 years? I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but
Hmm.
do you want to expand on that anymore?
No, I would just say that, I mean, like, did outside of a better interpretation, I don't see how it's not 1,000 years. It mentions it two times. It mentions that the devil is bound for 1,000 years, and then it says after the 1,000 years is over, he's let loose.
Yeah,
So I mean, like, to me, I would say Occam's razor. It says 1,000 years. I know it's a certain amount of time. Then I'm just going to go with 1,000 years, and because I think the difference is between probably us and them is we give allowance for this, knowing time is messy and we know history is messy, so we can say, well, yeah, the 1,000 years happened here. We're not exactly sure how it happened, but
yeah,
they want to be sure about everything. They want it almost seems like they want to have an answer for everything, and that's
yeah,
why they can point to Josephus giving them all the receipts, but we know he doesn't give all the receipts for the book of Revelation.
yeah. That's true. That is true. And that's something we have to acknowledge, right? Is that he is a good source, but he's just as good as any historical source because you don't know really how much you can rely on that, right? In this time. So, Um, one thing I do want to mention, though, is that Revelation 12:6 uses thousand literally. So I'm just going to put that in the chat. So Revelation 12:6 is 1,260 years. And I think there's inconsistency with the preterists. And this for me is a smoking gun to that whole 1,000 years because the word actually translates as a literal thousand, and they use it that way. So they use it to be three. What is it? 3.5 years.
Hmm.
So that one there, it's like, how can you use it that way in Revelation 12, but then you go to Revelation 20 and you're not using it as a literal, but it's the exact same word. So just putting that out there for anyone who's looking for a little bit of a concrete point to make.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, Okay, so New Heavens and New Earth. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know there's a lot of different interpretations about that.
Well, I mean, obviously, the most simple one to be would be that, like, everything gets made new. Like, everything, like, does this world that we stand on now, is that going to be the same one that's after all the things? I mean, that's how I used to always think before. I think that, to me, it's like there was a New Jerusalem. I don't know how old New Jerusalem has been there, but I believe that that's the kingdom of heaven, is where the city that descends down. I know that's where people live with Jesus at. Uh, Now the real question is, like, when was that made? I do wonder, like, I kind of wonder in the most literal sense of, like, that I did a podcast where it's kind of a wild thing, and obviously this is just a theory, guys, so you guys can take this for what you will. Is that we had that idea of, like, the Prague clock only showing a small part of the realm we're in, and if the new Earth could literally be land outside of this place, and then the new heaven above it would be literally a different sky than we have. I do wonder if it could be something as simple as that. I gotta admit, I've been watching a little bit of the Lord of the Rings stuff, like the new Ring of Power stuff, and I
Yeah,
was I was going down the rabbit hole the past couple of days about, like, the Tolkien mythologies, and, like, literally they have, like, the Valar and, like, all that. They are, like, in a lands to the west, and so Middle Earth is literally just the middle. It's not like heaven. I used to think that heaven was the higher part, and then there was the
yeah.
lower part of Earth, and then the middle was the middle Earth. No, but it's like it's kind of like on a map like this. The middle is the middle, and then
Oh,
outside of that, yeah. So there was so literally, like, there was a city that was given as a gift to the people who fought along the good side, and it was this epic city. And then it was next to the lands, like the eternal lands. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I wonder if that makes sense. Like, that what if the new
yeah,
heaven and new earth was literally on in the greater realm that we're in, but obviously we don't have access to it, and we won't until
yeah.
we're resurrected.
I mean,
I
it
know
kind
it's
of,
kind of it's an interesting concept, because I was thinking, like, gosh, I just think I don't think that Tolkien could just make this stuff up. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't believe anybody's that creative where he's creating a whole language and all this stuff.
I agree.
So much of it kind of lines up where it's like, oh man, it's kind of interesting. So
Yeah,
I would say that it I believe that it is some form of some kind of a literal new heaven and new earth, and I don't believe we're living on the new earth.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I have similar thoughts. Like I think everything in the Bible is spiritual and physical. So it's just that like we live in kind of behind the veil right now. Like we live without having that direct interaction with other beings, you know. Um, so I think there are it's always this hand in hand, and I don't mean to quote the occult, but you know how they say, as so,
Yeah, as
it
above,
kind of
so
has the up
below.
and down
Mhm.
thing. I don't even like saying it, but I think they kind of invert it because I think Jesus said, "Your will be done on earth as it is in
Mhm.
heaven."
Mhm.
And then he gave the keys to Peter, who would be able to bind. So anything he bound on earth would be bound in heaven, right? So I almost feel like that occult saying is like an inversion, but um, I think I think it all points to the fact that we're connected. We're connected to the spiritual, and so just to your point, like I do think that we're not in the new earth, and the new heavens are kind of like waiting to be revealed, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
But
it's interesting though. I do think that some people believe, and the more that I've read the book of Revelation, I've kind of paid attention to it. It's not like the whole it doesn't ever mention like and I think that this might be just a growing up as believing the scientific globe model, the heliocentric model. When we're heard like the earth is there's a new heaven, new earth, we almost like, oh well, so I guess the globe is destroyed and then there's another one made. And then there's whatever heaven is, that's new too. And it's like, but now in this kind of maybe in the biblical model, it's like it really never says that God destroys the whole earth. Like, like literally like snaps his finger like Thanos and it's gone and then he makes it back. So
yeah,
it could be like I said, it could be more like that. I've wondered this that like we only see in part, right? Like so we know that there's spirits in the general vicinity of us. We can't see them. I always think about like to the book of Kings when I think it was when Elisha gives, there's like this battle coming and then they think they're outnumbered and he's like, no, no. And he gave and like it was like God allowed him to show people the chariots of fire,
yeah,
all the things that were around that they could not see. So like
yeah,
that there's so much is veiled to us. So like if we by the time we're resurrected saints, like what will I know I guess I'm leaving a lot of room because I think sometimes I've tried to catch myself now when somebody says, "Is it literal or is it spiritual?" Well,
yeah,
spiritual things are literal. But it's like it's not physical like we can really kind of digest and see and touch and feel. So
exactly.
it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to explain. I do think it's
Yep,
put it this way. I think it's better than this.
I agree.
I think it's much better
We're
than
not going
this.
to go down a level. Like,
No, I think that's mostly what people really are disappointed with, like the preterist view, where it's like, so this is it? What do you mean
yeah,
this is it? This has got to be it's got to be better than this. And I think that as somebody who really you're thinking about all the promises to God's people, and it's like it's definitely better than this.
yeah. And that's what I think is actually so sad about people who think this life is the only life, because um, the best is yet to come. And there's this kind of like hashtag live your living your best life kind of thing, and I'm just
Mhm.
like, this is our best life. Oh my goodness. Like,
Yeah, well,
you know what?
I think that's the Christian attitude though, is that no, we would be happy to give this place up because we know
Yeah,
this is it's better. And it's like, but it's kind of like that if you're it's almost like that some of that attitude, and I won't paint everybody with this broad brush that's a preterist, but it's almost like that we should just be happy with what is. But
yeah,
obviously it's there's that groaning to be closer with God in that way that like we could really tangibly be there. And I think that like if you did view this place as really good, well, that isn't that kind of the opposite message that well, I'm supposed to be denying myself and I'm supposed to be able to like pick up my cross and like and be willing to suffer in this place. Don't tell me this is the best it's ever going to be, and then I'm supposed to just enjoy it for what it is and cling to it. It's like I feel like the opposite message is that no, God has got something. He's prepared a place for me, and it's not here.
Yeah,
It's where He's at. It's
exactly.
not right here.
Yeah, and I mean, just think of all of the difficulties that we all experience daily just because this place is so corrupt, psychologically, spiritually, physically. Like
Mhm.
there's so much corruption here. And it's just so nice to know that God is creating a place for us, and it's going to be wonderful. I mean, and we do our best here and now, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And we store up for ourselves treasures in heaven as well, which is important to do. But I was thinking, when we were talking about the land beyond, and do you remember those board games where in the middle there's like a bubble and then there's like a dice in the middle and you push the bubble down
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
it pops the dice? Well, I was thinking of like, what if the flat plane is the board game and then we're kind of in the bubble right now, but when fire rains down and destroys the earth that we know now, that becomes almost like the lake of fire in the middle. And they stay within this kind of enclosed place, but it'll just be fire.
I mean, it's possible.
Kind of
I think it's interesting because I just read the Book of Enoch again, and I think that in the Book of Enoch, like the lake of fire was like to the west. It was like he was taking him far beyond what this plane
oh,
was, and
okay.
it was
Oh,
actually on the outside,
right.
which kind of makes sense because it's like there's outer darkness. But like I said, I think that actually makes sense in the kind of like the idea that we're enclosed in this ice wall.
Yeah.
Is there things past the ice wall? I'm starting to come to the conclusion that there are. And so the ice wall is basically where the circuit of the sun runs. So
Yeah.
anything outside of where the sun is would be dark unless you are literally with Jesus, who
Yeah.
would be your light. And then so outside of that, I guess it's kind of cool to think about like that the extent of this place, we have no idea. Like we really have no idea how vast the earth as far as like the lands beyond and all the things that could be.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of it's interesting to speculate about.
Yeah. And just to go back to the predators thing for a minute, I think they would say that the new heavens and new earth are the new covenant, right? So, kind of
Mhm.
just to that point, and I think that there's a point to that. Like the Israel was often referred to as heavens and earth, I think, or at least you could interpret it that way. So in Deuteronomy 32, um, it says, "Give ear, O heavens, and hear, O earth," but he's actually talking to Israel. So there could be that interpretation as well. So again, but as you say, like there's always a spiritual component to everything. And if spiritual just meaning of a higher kind of creation level of creation, maybe.
Well, I
So
think that what they try to say that the heaven is like the temple system. Right, which, like, it's almost like
yeah,
I can kinda see that because it's like that's how man connects with heaven is by going into this building that's, like, obviously, it's got these certain dimensions, like the tabernacle and things. They were supposed to be mirrors of heaven, and then you have the mercy seat. It's like it's all visions of heaven, and so
yeah,
when that was destroyed, okay, so heaven was passed away. But you also have a connection when Jesus sends the Holy Spirit, the Father sends the Holy Spirit to us. Now we have the kingdom within us and we're connected with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Like,
yeah,
through the Holy Spirit, we're connected with them. So like that temple system. But obviously to me, it's like there's still a literal heaven because
yeah,
because Jesus literally went up. And then they said, "Hey, with the two men or the two angels, however you want to interpret that, they were like, just like how you saw him come up, he, went up. He's going to come back down." So he literally went up. They said he sat on the throne next to the Father, and
hmm,
he was going to return one day. So that place is up there.
yep,
I mean, so I believe that there is a literal heaven, not
yeah,
just an allegory.
yeah. I agree. And doesn't it say like Jesus is the only man that hath ascended to the heavens or something? There's a verse about that.
Well,
Um,
Jesus tells, I think, Nicodemus that no man has been to heaven except for he who's descended down. So he's saying like that
that's right.
nobody's seen that place except for me.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really interesting. And then during the little season, shall we say, or during the millennial reign, um, Jesus and then the saints would have been ruling from New Jerusalem. So just on that point, I guess I didn't put this in the questions, but is your perspective that the New Jerusalem is more likely above, or would you say it's more likely kind of on the earth right now?
I mean, I would just say based on like obviously the fact that it's a heavenly Jerusalem. It's like I said, in Matthew it talks about the kingdom of heaven, and I think it's in Galatians chapter 3. Paul references that the Jerusalem that's on the earth is in bondage, but the Jerusalem that's above is free. So to me,
Okay.
it's like, yeah, I mean, we know that it can move and it can descend down. I mean,
Yeah.
so at that point, like how like did it descend down during the millennial reign? Was it lower where it was perceived, or was it always above? Those are the kind of questions I think that I have, and I'm not sure about.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think we have to leave open, right? What we don't know.
Hmm.
Obviously,
Hmm.
we don't need to be sure about everything. It's important to just figure these things out as we go. And so, how do Revelation 12 and 20 compare? Because I think there's a difference in the way that these are interpreted. So, I think, like, as far as the release of Satan and the Great Tribulation, and then if, well, the one thing I don't, we were talking about this, but some preterists think that Satan actually was the Old Covenant Israel, or at least the leaders of Old Covenant Israel, because they were the ones that persecuted Christ, and they were the ones that killed the prophets and
Hmm.
did all of that. So, in terms of the overlap, like, what are your thoughts between, or sort of like to correlate Revelation 12 and 20?
Well, I mean, I would say that the way I interpret Revelation 20 or 12 anyways is like it makes the most sense that like this is what's happening right after. Well, I mean, obviously I believe that Revelation 12 is funny, as I just put out my old Christmas video where I was saying like that the signs in the heavens are showing you like this what the sky looked like when Jesus was born. And
Yeah,
so it says that obviously the dragon was trying to devour the child as soon as he was born. And you think about like how Mary and Joseph had to flee to Egypt to avoid, because obviously Herod was killing children. So
yeah,
they had to flee. And so eventually, obviously, he gets caught up. He's given a rod of iron. And then right after that, there's the battle in heaven. So I
hmm,
remember like people always wondering, like, so when was that battle in heaven? And some people would say, oh, well, that was before time even began. It was all, but it seems actually
yeah,
clear to me at this point that when Jesus did take the right hand, he'd got all authority on heaven and earth.
yeah,
And I think that's the point where it was like the devil had no place in heaven anymore. It's like,
exactly.
and so Jesus said, Michael, Michael and the boys, go cast that old serpent out of heaven. And so there
Yeah,
was a battle, and that's when they fell. And then so that's what it's saying. Like, so the devil came home, so there's a rejoice in heaven, but then a woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because the devil is coming down with great wrath and he knows his time is short. And
yeah,
so like that's when he pursues the woman first, and then eventually he pursues the woman's descendants. It makes
yeah,
perfect sense. Like this is setting up the great tribulation. So when Jesus goes up there, he casts the serpent down, and that's when things get really bad for the church.
yeah, yeah. I agree with that. And then, but then, not to counter that too much, but like, I think again, it's just understanding the spiritual and the physical. But we see in Job that he's walking to and fro on the earth,
Hmm.
and so it's. Would you say that is something that he can do? He has a place in heaven, but he can also be on the earth,
The
like in the
way
Old Testament. I mean,
the way I read it is in that before that happened in Revelation 12, he was able to go back and forth
yeah,
at will. And it
yeah,
was like, but once this happened, he came down and there was no place for him in heaven ever again.
yeah,
Like that was over. And so like he was basically stuck here. And that's why it was like basically the only thing he's going to do at this point is try to deceive, kill, and destroy, because there's no plan left. Like he's got no moves to make except for that.
yeah,
But obviously during the times of Job, it would have been like he's the accuser.
yeah,
So what he would do is he would go up to heaven, he would be accusing us for this person's a lawbreaker, this person's this, he's the person's that. Job's going to curse you to your face, God, if you do this to him. Like, so he's the Asatan, he's the Satan.
yeah,
And so he's the accuser of the brethren. And that's literally what it says, like that they're rejoicing in heaven because the accuser has been thrown down. And so he
Yeah.
can't do it anymore because obviously he can't because Jesus paid the price. Jesus is the appropriation of our sin. So like he's the one, he's the medium between us and the Father. So like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what he accuses of us. So there's no reason for him to be there anymore.
Yeah. And it's kind of like his role was made null and void. It's like when you like if your position was to be made redundant at work, like
Mhm.
you're done. There's no job for you here anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and
Absolutely.
it says as well that he made an open shame, like he put them to shame openly, right? So
Mhm.
it's almost like I guess in our current day, draining the swamp.
Right, exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's a good way
Yeah,
to put it.
yeah. Um, so I mean, I think that explains it really well, and I agree with you. I think there was that time where he was now like, "Oh no, I'm out of a job," and now all those prophecies are coming true that were said of him from way back. All the
Mhm.
promises that Jesus said were coming true. So it was obviously a pretty scary time for him. Um, so, what do you think are the first and second resurrections? And then I'll talk about maybe what the preterists would say.
Well, what's interesting is that I know a lot of people talk about this, and of course, like I said, I don't claim to know everything. It is interesting when Jesus was died on the cross. It mentioned all these tombs opened up in Jerusalem, and people just walked out of them. And isn't it sort of a weird part in Matthew that just is mentioned, and it's almost like, oh, by the way, this happened, and you're
Yeah,
like, okay, so can we hear a little more follow up on the fact that tombs opened up and people walked out of them, and so what happened to that? I mean, so obviously that sounds like a resurrection, but I believe that what it's specifically saying is that when Jesus came back, obviously I can even think about like when he's setting the captives free, those people were resurrected. Obviously the saints who died during the tribulation were resurrected, and whoever was resurrected before the millennial reign started, that's the first resurrection. And then the
yeah,
second one is not till afterwards, which I believe that could be one big resurrection, or it could be that everybody who dies post millennial reign is resurrected to stand before God. Whether well, I mean, I don't know that you get judged if you are one of his, but if you didn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not sure if there is a one blanket resurrection for everybody, or if it literally is like everyone's resurrected to stand before the throne.
yeah,
And, obviously, if you're in the book of life, you get to enter in the joy of your master. If not, outer darkness, gnashing of teeth.
yeah. I want to read those verses actually from Matthew 27. So it's verses 51 onwards. And it says, as soon as Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. Like, that's crazy.
It's like it really is one of the most insane verses in the whole Bible, and it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, don't you want to hear more about that? I do. I certainly want
Yeah.
to hear more about that.
And the preterist I've heard speaking on this topic just totally doesn't even acknowledge that verse. So I don't know what version they're reading, but so yeah, to me that would be the first resurrection, 100%, right? Because those people, the saints, it even calls them the saints in that verse.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they're literally going to be the ones that were raised up, that he freed from the Sheol,
Mhm.
took with
Yep.
him, and then he went to heaven, and they were raised into glory. And then I guess, in my mind, the people who sort of were martyred as well, they would have been resurrected as well. I just kind of wonder if those saints from that resurrection were kind of just hanging out until everything went down in Jerusalem, and then they kind of rose as well.
Well,
I
I mean,
wonder.
it does seem to me like that like the apostles and they were given like the thrones to judge and things like that. So like it wasn't over yet. But yeah, obviously that must have been the start of the first fruits of the resurrection is like that they got resurrected.
Yeah,
But obviously Paul does caution people that do not be shaken by people who said the resurrection's already happened.
yeah,
So like there is one to come. before when they're caught up in the clouds.
Yeah.
So, whether you say that's a rapture or not, but it does seem like that because it says specifically like these people who obviously were faithful to God during the tribulation are the ones who are going to get to reign with him.
Yeah.
And I think that's specifically what what Paul says is that yeah, those who suffer with him are going to be resurrected with him and they're going to reign with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's my next slide actually. So do you believe the saints reigned physically or spiritually only? Because I think what I've been hearing from preterist side is that this is a spiritual. This was really strange for me to hear because all of the iconography of the sort of what we would call the millennial reign time, like the Middle
Mhm.
Ages, it shows them like in court with Jesus, like they're all got their halos on and everything. So, um, but they kind of explain it as they were spiritually dead and then they became spiritually alive. Uh, but as I understand it, they would have died probably a martyr's death, and
Mhm.
or at least some of them, and then they would have been resurrected, like in that uh, lifting up to heaven, and and then when they got there, they would have had their glorified bodies. So I don't know. It's not just spiritual for me, but
Well, I would say that that's I mean, I guess that maybe I'm a little bit on the sort of maybe lean on the kind of preterist side because I almost thought it would be like that if in Ephesians 6:12 it says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the authorities, the powers, the cosmic powers over this present darkness, the
yeah,
spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. I thought it could mean that those corrupt heavenly hosts, sons of God, angels were replaced by the saints. And
yeah,
then so in the same way that they reigned from a heavenly place, that now the saints and Jesus rule from that same place or a new place.
yeah,
Now, I leave room that they could have come back and forth. Like I do not know the level of like, I mean, because obviously we know that the angel of the Lord shows up when he wants to. We know that
yeah,
Gabriel and Michael show up when they want to, uh, or when God tells them to go show up.
yeah,
But so if they can show up and they can appear to people, then why couldn't the saints do the same thing? I don't believe that the saints were living on earth as we know it
right,
during
yeah,
that time, but I believe that they likely could have. Yeah, I mean, I'm leaving a lot of room for it to be more
yeah,
like that we don't see them, but they still obviously had an impact and people did, with the halos just kind of seemed like that there was some kind of contact and they knew that they were doing that. Or maybe the people just made inferences from what the scripture says that they were ruling from heaven and they depicted them like shining like the stars, like it says in the book of Daniel.
yeah. Yeah. And Paul and I were talking about this on Sunday. And uh, I mean, I just offered the view that like I think they could just come and go. Like they might be the only ones that are allowed into the New Jerusalem right now, or at least through the millennial reign. So Jesus and them would have probably been coming and going and
Mhm. Mhm.
um, appearing on earth. I know Jesus appears on earth. He appears to people, and I'm sure the saints do too. I kind of like to think they just pose as regular people, just walking around, and you know, I actually
Interesting.
wonder. Do you want to hear a strange theory that I have?
I'd
And it's
love
a
to.
total speculation. There's
Mhm.
literally just this is just my brain how I work. Um, when we hear people like DJT saying things like this, and I'm not saying this is exactly what the phrase he uses, but he often refers to a small group of people that are causing him problems. And I just wonder if, let's say, the system that we live in right now is it's like the false, admiralty maritime law, um, fake paper existence, right? So like we're
Mhm.
kind of we're in a fake system right now, and it's almost like we're in a boat and we're just floating over the real law of the land. So I don't think Jesus rule or his laws that's written on our hearts, I don't think any of that actually went away. I don't think his government ever went away. And I just wonder how much overlap there is between the government of Jesus and the governments of the world, and how much they actually interact with each other, either on a spiritual level or literally saying, you can't do that, XYZ, or whatever.
Mhm.
And I just think of times like when the abortion law was overturned. What was it called?
Roe v. Wade.
Roe v. Wade. Yeah. Things like that just make me wonder if there is another group that are still kind of just interacting when they have to kind of just keep things at a certain level. And then I mentioned to you before as well. Actually, I put this on one of my posts on Instagram, and it was that ICE agents, ICEE
Mhm.
agents,
Oh, yeah.
um, and whether that could be related to the Southern Wall, because they
Oh,
talk
right.
about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
wall,
Mhm.
on the southern border and all this stuff. And I just wonder if there's, when you pass a certain level in government, when you start actually interacting with the entities, whether that be Jesus' crew or whether that be the other side, to really get to that level, um anyway, just a thought I had.
No, I actually I like that theory. It's funny because I almost made a video today because like I said I was going down the Tolkien universe and I was watching that show and really interesting and I wanted to make a video about like the black goo because like in that series like this is kind of like how Sauron deceives everyone. And so Sauron is he's called the deceiver. He's got many names. I mean he's like the devil.
Yeah,
And but it's interesting. It's almost like I could see like a little season type view where it's like the he really does not have any authority. He can, but he gets people. He's a master manipulator, and he can get people to do what he wants them to do. And it ends up being their willing decision to do the wrong thing is how he gets his power, which I thought was really interesting. Obviously, he does have real power, but he
yeah,
at the end of the day, like people are always saying, like, I didn't do that. Like, yeah, you did. And he gives them all the reasons why they made all the wrong decisions along the way that he didn't force them to do. And
yeah.
point being was at one point he's killed, like his body, he has like an earthly look. He almost looks like it appears like an elf at one part in the series, and
Hmm.
he's killed. But then he bleeds out this black goo, and then he's just this blob. And eventually he kind of like go finds another host, and then he's this other man. He appears as a different man. And I was like thinking,
Huh.
wow, I really do wonder if now I'm watching this, I'm like, could it really be like that? Could it really be like that we all wonder if like, do the elites have what kind of access do they have really with that old serpent? Is it
I agree.
possible that he and it mentions in the Tolkien universe, he literally appears as a serpent at times. So it's like that could it be that he takes the form as a human and he appears as one all the time. And maybe one you see on TV all the time, you don't even know. And it's like,
Yeah,
so he is influencing, and every now and then, obviously, he manifests to the people he's around, like where they really know that he's more than just a regular person.
yeah.
And so, if that's true, we do know in the book of Hebrews it says, obviously, be careful how you like treat people, because you could be entertaining angels unawares.
Yeah,
So if that's
I
true
agree.
as well, I mean, so obviously if that's true that I don't know. I mean, I do think that's interesting because I feel like that maybe lots of us who went from like a post tribulation view, rapture view to this, we still have this earthly kingdom in view that we think it's going to be like this. And so we all think,
Hmm.
oh, it's well, the saints are all hanging out, Jesus is hanging out with everybody.
Yeah,
But maybe it wasn't like that. Maybe that they do interact, but it's in a way that it's not so open. It
hmm,
is, but it's not. You know what I'm saying? Like they do have
hmm,
access and they can interact, but it's not like how we pictured it with like literal halos and like glowing bodies and all of the nine.
yeah. Well, I will say, my auntie, my great aunt, actually had a visitation from Jesus, and he was brighter than the sun. Like he was, like,
Oh wow.
yeah. Um, So, I mean, it could also just depend on how they decide to present themselves. Because when Jesus was walking with the two men on the road to Emmaus, it was like a normal person, right? So,
That's true. That's also a good point is that they did not, it makes very clear in multiple parts in after the resurrection that it's like he appears as a different person, like entirely, because
yeah,
they don't recognize him until he breaks the bread. And then
yeah,
even it meant, I think in John, was it John 21, is when he's on the beach. They kind of make it sense like that he does not look like himself, but they still knew it was him.
yeah. And even Mary, when she went to the garden, she just thought it was the gardener.
Yeah, that was the gardener.
Yeah. So, there's obviously something that he could do to almost disguise himself, which I just find really fun and interesting. Like,
Yeah, well, I think it's in the way kind of that if he appeared as in his glorified form at all times, it'd be like it's. I always thought that maybe that would take away some of the faith aspect of being able to believe, right? Is because you wouldn't need
mm,
any faith if he appeared to you in his glorified form and he was hanging around all the time.
yeah,
Because then would you be good because you wanted to, or would you be good because you were terrified?
yeah. All I know is well, my great auntie, but other people that I've kind of heard testimonies of, it's just the indescribable love and peace that they sort of just they can't describe what it feels like to be with him. So, I'm sure he can be scary if he wants to be, but yeah, I think for us who love him, he's definitely um just full of love, right?
Well, it does
But
say that when in the book of Revelation, when John sees him, he falls down dead because he's scared.
true,
So
true.
like, so it's kind of like it's like the glory of what he looks like is like it's awesome and terrifying. He's got
Yeah,
flames in his eyes and all that stuff. It's
yeah,
his face is like shines like the sun and lightning and all that stuff. So I mean, but
yeah.
yeah, obviously he could appear. Yeah, he could appear how he wants to.
Yeah,
To
and
us.
I think at one point his robes are red with the blood, so
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty
yeah,
intense.
so, okay, yeah, no, that's good. So, I'll move to the next question. So did the binding of Satan happen in Christ's ministry or the fall of Jerusalem? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it was. I would say that it did not happen until after the tribulation happened. So, like, I would say that, because obviously he's cast down, and it says, like I said in Revelation 12, he pursues the woman, and then he pursues the woman's descendants. And so, obviously, I don't think there'd be all these martyrs unless you know God was using the devil to cause tribulation on the earth.
Yeah,
So, like, it wasn't until after like basically Rome fell that he was bound, and after
that's
that,
what
he
I
was
think.
not allowed.
Yeah, because I was listening, and the preterist would say that actually he was bound sometime in his ministry, which I find really strange. Um, like maybe sometime around the temptation or something like that, because it actually they coincided with the gospel being shared to the world, and that there was no hindrance to the growth of the gospel. But I attribute that to the Holy Spirit, not directly to the binding of Satan. So I, I don't know. But saying that as well, when Jesus died, he legally blotted out all of the ordinances that were against us. So it might be yeah. He would have had to go up though. He would have had to ascend and actually um because when he ascended, he went up and he unseated them at that point, I think. He probably, took his new covenant with them and like basically said you have no job anymore and then threw them out of heaven. So,
Well, I mean, the way I read it is that he obviously took all authority. So he had all authority, and then he gave the authority to the apostles, and he told them to go forth and then do all the things I told you to do. And now you have authority to go into these places that once were under the dominion of these heavenly hosts, the devil himself. And then so after that, the devil was still free to obviously cause great torment and wrath on the earth. And so, but what's interesting, I think, is that the devil gives his authority over to the beast. So it's kind of like whatever authority he had, he gave it over to the spirit. and the spirit obviously was the spirit of Rome and all that stuff. And so like during that time, that is what caused all of the tribulation for the church and for,
Yeah.
the Jerusalem and all that stuff. So like but it wasn't until after that that he was bound. So I mean,
Hmm.
I think there was obviously a period where the church had authority over Satan,
Yeah.
but he was still free. And then at some point he was not free anymore. And that was after,
Yeah.
when that was after the Battle of Armageddon.
Yeah. And I mean, I just remember, because this is something I was talking to Paul about, but I'm actually going to be going into it more in my new series, The Millennial Reign of Jesus Christ. And so when Jesus gave the keys to Peter to bind and to loose, I see that as being like a correlation, like a direct one to one with the binding of Satan. I think that what they bound on earth was bound in heaven. So if the church, made a binding law on earth, that would also impact that heavenly situation, or political. I think it's a very legal environment, so that connection between the spiritual and the physical is like, it's like a legally binding
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah, I viewed that when he says whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. I believe that he basically is giving them legal authority to cast people out of the church. And it's in the way that it's a spiritual death, because he's
Yeah.
like, because the way he's describing is it's like in multiple witnesses. Like, so with multiple witnesses, kind of like that you have access to like tell this person to leave your congregation. And if you do that, you bind it on earth, it's bound in heaven if they don't listen.
Yeah.
So that's the way I view that, just because it's the way it's written. It's like it's literally like the the law of like one or two to three witnesses in order to basically stone somebody in the Old Testament covenant.
Yeah. um and actually, if you look at the laws in the millennial reign, they talk about excommunication very seriously. So I think there's a lot more depth to belonging to the church in the millennial reign than there
Hmm.
was sort of like at this point where we're living right now. Like, if you were excommunicated from the church, it was almost like you're not going to heaven. Like, you don't have a place in heaven.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it meant. I think that's exactly what he was saying. Like that,
Yeah.
if you do this on earth, even was it in First Corinthians 5? Paul talks about kicking somebody out of the church, and he says, "Give him over to Satan." And
Yeah.
but he also mentions that it's kind of like that if you do that, you might be able to save his soul. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think in the way he's saying it's like that you're kicking them out of the church, and if the story ends there, yeah, no heaven for that person. But
Yeah.
he's basically saying like that if you do that, there's obviously it still seems like he gave room for repentance, because I think that's what the probably the modern church really lacks, is that a standard that we're all supposed to keep. And it's like that if you're allowed to just be, like when there's no standards, it's like that some people are in a very spiritually precarious place and they don't even know it until you go rebuke them, you go rebuke them too, and then you kick them out of the church. And then at
Yeah.
that point, they they do know that they're in error, and then they have to make a decision about what they're going to do after that.
Yeah. And I remember that being a bit more common, like when I was growing up. I don't know about you, but like if somebody was excommunicated from the church, it was actually really serious for them. And I don't know, I guess now it's not, maybe you have to be a member or something of a church to actually get excommunicated. Like, you're not just
Yeah.
attending, but you're actually
Well, I
part of
mean,
the
if you think
council.
about it, I think that the whole thing, it's like a little leaven spoils the whole bunch. So it's kind of like that. It's not only beneficial for them, but obviously it's beneficial for your flock, because it's like it's confusing to people. And I think that that's what
Yeah.
that's what the church has got the biggest gripe you hear about the modern church is the fact that, oh, that place is full of hypocrites. Well, that's a
Exactly.
that is, I mean, it's they're not wrong. I mean, but I think that
Yeah.
that's the problem, is that people who are like the Pharisees are whitewashed tombs,
Yeah.
that they look all good on the outside, but people who really know those people are like that. These people are the ones who are the most pious, and they act like that they're better than other people. They post every Sunday when they go to church, but then they live like the devil every other day of the week, including Sunday, just not during those short hours of the church
Yeah.
service.
Yeah. It's not a good look, and it doesn't give people the impression that are looking for truth that there's actual truth there, because you're not demonstrating it. You're just and you know, when I was living in the world and I wasn't following the Lord, I actually found people who were, it's almost like a survival thing. You have to prove yourself and you have to be trustworthy. like,
Yeah, right.
um,
Mhm.
it's for different reasons, but obviously, yeah, it can come across a little disingenuous in the church for sure.
Mhm.
And that just breeds distrust, unfortunately. But yeah, so no, that's a good point. So the release of Satan, could it have happened before 70 AD? Like we talked about that a little bit, but do you think there's any way at all that could be valid? I mean, that's really a preterist position, or a full preterist position, I should say. But maybe there's a partial preterist view on that as well.
I don't see it scripturally at all. I don't see how you could say the devil was bound before 70 AD.
Yeah,
Because again, like I said, that is a judgment on the whore of Babylon. And then so who judges the whore? The beast. So who
yeah,
gave the beast authority? The devil did.
yeah,
So like how does he give any authority if he's in the pit?
yeah,
Right? So like yeah, this stuff has to happen afterwards.
yeah. I agree. Like, what are your perceptions? And I know it's total speculation because we don't know, but how do you think that like, just from a, I guess, maybe a high level view, like what are your thoughts around what was incorporated in the release of Satan? Like, we see now, like probably several years later, how we're affected by it current day, but what is it actually taken to get here for the release, like after the release of Satan, like in your perspective?
You guys are probably gonna get annoyed with this, but I'm gonna bring it back to the Lord of the Rings once again. I think it's really interesting the way that show is presented, and it's like so that in the current series you're seeing this physical bodied man and he's manipulating people, but then later in like the movie series, he's just this lidless eye. And it's like there's these rumors that he's back. It's almost kind of like even like in the Harry Potter series, if you guys have heard, like watched any of that, was like when Voldemort was like there was just rumors that he was back, and it was like, but people didn't even believe it, or some people didn't even believe he was real. And I think it's kind of interesting. I think that's sort of what like that's showing you in these shows. It's like that's kind of how the Lord of the Rings starts. It's they're starting like there's certain things that should not have been forgotten, but they were. And then
Yeah,
through this, he's manipulated people, and there's this kind of dark energy, and everyone kind of feels it. And then before you know it, it's like the fact that they ignore it for so long, it builds to this crescendo where it's like it's going to literally destroy their whole world because they
yeah,
let it grow like that.
yeah,
When they shouldn't have. And I wonder, it's like I really do believe that I think that that's the whole thing with the devil these days is that I don't believe he's the God of this world anymore. I mean,
no,
I believe that Jesus has all authority, but
yeah,
I do believe that the only way he can rule this place is through deception. It's like
yeah,
denying that he even exists. Like the whole idea, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. I believe that that's where we're at right now. And yeah, and I still leave room. Yeah, could he be physically manifesting in the form of a man
hmm,
in order to be like their Pied Piper to lead them in some kind of way?
yeah,
Or like I said, it's so interesting that it's some like he's presented as this lidless eye, just like the Eye of Horus, like the Illuminati, the Great Seal of America. It's like seems like that's sort of what they're saying.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many correlations there for sure. I mean, one thing I would say is that I think for the general masses, say, let's say the not adept in any kind of secret society, obviously people have totally just like, the devil doesn't exist, God doesn't exist. They're sold on this kind of like low level thinking. But obviously, when you get to a certain level, you probably do find out he does exist, but you get fed this kind of story. So he must have, I mean, I just imagine, somebody walking into a room and they're going past, I don't know, whatever degree they're going to get to. So they're realizing now that this entity actually exists, and he's going to wow them. He's going to be like, actually, I'm the god of this world, because
Mhm.
they don't know any better. They're just going along, right? Um, so I almost think like he is still posing as the god of this world.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 100%. Well, it's interesting. There was the former guy claimed to be former Illuminati, Doc Marquis, who, you know, became born again Christian. He would preach out against
Right.
like all of the secret societies. But what he's claimed was that the reason these people worship Lucifer is because he was the only God that was left on this earth. And I thought, wow,
Right.
that's kind of
Mm,
chilling. It's kind of like that. It makes a little sense. Like, obviously, I mean, to Christians, it doesn't really make any sense, but it makes more sense than like the idea of what, the normies would think about Satanists, right?
yeah.
People who worship Lucifer, they would just think of him like the Church of Satan, but like it's really not like that.
Yeah.
That they are worshiping a real, tangible thing they can see and touch, and he must interact with them in some kind of way.
I agree.
I do
Yeah.
wonder, like, that to going back what I was saying about, like, the whole black goo and, like, he literally was black goo and then he took on a form. I do wonder, I was starting to think about that, like, I often just thought, like, the whole black goo thing when you see it is just demons, but
Hmm.
what if it's more than demons? Like, when you see, like, those like, the Billie Eilish video and you have, like, black goo, like, leaking out her eyes and,
Yeah.
like, you see them bathing in it, and it's like, what if it is a like, he is actually physically entering them, like, as somebody mentioned that how Satan entered Judas.
Yeah.
Like, what if he really is working through them, like himself?
Yeah. Like a sentient kind of um, substance or something like that. Is that what, like the goo?
Yeah,
What are
like,
you
well,
talking
it's like
about?
this
Like
hive
venom?
mind where it's like he's more than we know, and I think that we would be. Well, I mean, I guess I said I was even talking to Brian the other day on the last podcast we did, and I was saying like we are talking about would angels need like UFOs or whatever, some kind of
Yeah.
ship. And it's like, I really don't know what kind of power the angels have. I really don't know. And I think that if we're all being honest, we really don't know what they're capable of. We don't know their limitations.
Yeah.
So what could they do? We know they're obviously not omnipotent. We know that they can't be everywhere at once like God could, but it is interesting to think like, and I do know that like when the Bible references Satan, it's not always referencing the devil. It's referencing like the horde of the fallen.
Yeah.
And so like if the devil was bound, well, what about the other fallen? Were they all thrown into the lake of fire after the Battle of Armageddon, or are some of those free too?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know, but actually kind of did make sense in the way that if they said that the devil was the only god left, it's like
Yeah.
maybe he was the only one allowed left, and it's like him and his kind of horde of like spirits, this bunch of demons that he commands, and they're all yeah, it's all this kind of hive mind thing.
Yeah. Because I believe demons are still wandering around. But the book of, is it first, second, or third Peter? I can't remember which one, but it talks about the angels being bound. Or is that the book
Hmm.
of Jude? Anyway.
Well, the book of Jude mentions it, and also Peter
Yeah.
mentions it. Yeah, it mentions that they were in Tartarus waiting judgment. So,
That's
but
right.
interestingly, I would say that based on being in the little season, did those angels that were bound did experience judgment because they were there till judgment. But maybe their judgment day was different. Well, actually, no, that I could take that back because it mentions I think is in Revelation 14 that those angels who were under the Euphrates that were chained up were released.
Yeah.
So I believe that those beings were funneled into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and they were carved up like everyone else. So
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I guess at the same point, we really don't know about the other entities that are in league
Yeah.
with Satan.
Yeah. We can just see evidence of demons, right? So I
I mean,
think,
I would say that that's to me, and that's always why I like would say that if you ever had any chance to convince me that all these things had been fulfilled, you can't convince me that demons don't exist anymore.
yeah.
You can't get me to believe that Satan doesn't exist right now because if not like, I mean, it's kind of like all my other research has led me to this conclusion that
I know.
these spirits are dominating society. And
Yeah.
you see in your own, you see it in like, you can see people who obviously have a darkness behind their eyes, and it's not them sometimes. You're like, so there's no way that's not real. I
Yeah.
just I won't believe it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's enough, personal testimonies out there that tell us that as well, right? So I think just going back to the binding and the loosing of, the authority that the church had, as you say, was to like excommunicate and that kind of thing. Um, but it also says that they would beat down Satan under their feet,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, they had the authority to tread on serpents and scorpions. And that's also another reason that when Jesus is there, he's saying, "You know that the kingdom of God is at hand when you can cast out demons by the finger of God." And so,
Yeah.
like, I think obviously we live in a day when you can do that, but before that was like, obviously that's the apostles are like freaking out. Even the demons listen to us, Lord. And he's kind of like, that's not, don't worry, that's not as big a deal as your name being written in the book of life. But he is saying like that now that I'm here, I'm giving you authority in my name to go do these things. And that's how you know the kingdom's here. And obviously it's the power of the Holy Spirit that does that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the verse I was looking at was Romans 16:20. It says, "And the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly." I think that's really interesting imagery just for the you know, that kind of authority that the church would have over
Hmm.
all,
Hmm.
all things really. So I see that as an expression of the government of God, so that on earth as it is in heaven. So, you know, Jesus ruling and reigning with the saints would have been what we would consider to be in heaven because they were glorified. And then the on earth part would be the church. So that would be your millennial reign kind of time frame.
Yeah. And even said, I think was it in Ephesians that he was saying that we're seated in heavenly places.
Yeah.
So he was kind of using that as a present day that we are seated in heavenly places like the saints were. So
Yeah.
likely we were going back to that first resurrection that likely happened when Jesus was crucified. That yeah, that happened then.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, what is the greatest evidence of our current time being the little season, would you say?
Um, I mean, I don't want to speak past what I know, but I would say that it's pretty much. I mean, based on anything I know, it sounds like the most deceptive time ever. Everybody's questioning everything.
Yeah.
Now, I know that Solomon said that there's nothing new under the sun, so maybe it was like this at another time. But I would say the best evidence that I came to this conclusion was that when I looked at the relevancy of like or the audience relevancy of what the apostles, the letters they sent, the people Jesus was speaking to, he's saying like that this current time period is the end. And then so we
Yeah.
know we're past that. And like I said, if everything was perfect now, then obviously I would agree with the full preterist, but it's not.
Yeah.
So I would say, like again, we have lots of deception. We have really dark and murky parts in our past to make me think that people are lying to us, they're hiding things from us, and but yeah, I would say that the best evidence is that Jesus told the truth and he came back when he said he was, and then but I have not seen all the things that were promised, at least in our
Yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah. And so, like the literal lake of like Satan being thrown into a lake of fire, like as we were saying, like Satan's obviously still at work on the earth
Mhm.
deceiving. Like I can't imagine there was any time in history, not saying there wasn't, but that was quite as high level deception as we're going through right now. Like when you consider the space thing, evolution, school indoctrination, and the corporate kind of church scene that co-opted, I should say, the co-opted
Mhm.
church, things like that. So, and it just seems like every day there's a big new deception going on. Even our laws, like I was saying before, the Admiralty Maritime Law that we're kind of subject to at the moment. So it's kind of a never-ending list. And I would say if if you could accept that preterism was fully like that full preterist position, it would be like going around with blindfold on. You wouldn't be able to like acknowledge anything was happening in the world.
Right. I would say too that one of I think the best evidence is the fact that we have the Anno Domini chronology. So at some point, everyone acknowledged that Jesus was Lord. We dated everything based on that, and then I would sure even me being 46, and I'm sure in a lot of people's lifetime, we've seen the eroding of the the Christian values and just degrading of everything. So it's kind of like that, and I can imagine obviously my our parents' generation and then their parents' generation, like what they would have found acceptable based on their values that are based on biblical principles. Even like America, I mean, like I said, I know that the people who supposedly founded this place were deists, and they still did have like these Christian values that were basically put into laws. I mean, like literally, they put like the Ten Commandments on
Hmm.
on the courtrooms. Like the people prayed in schools. Not saying they did everything perfectly, but I mean, you could imagine like things continue to like digress after that. So
Yeah.
that to me, it does seem like that. Okay, so if Satan is released and he's deceiving people, there is a process. There's a process of the generations being deceived, and obviously older generations passing away, and then new ones growing up in a world where it's like, yeah, God doesn't even exist. We came
Yeah.
from monkeys. There's a big bang. Like all the crazy things. They believe every little bit about outer space. They believe in aliens, but they couldn't believe in things from heaven. And I think to me, it's like, but there was a time that was not that long ago that people believed in all the right things. They might not have lived perfectly, but they did believe like what was true,
Yeah.
and it was based on biblical principles.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, right? Like, I wonder though how far after the millennial reign that was, and that sort of founding of the nations in kind of the early stages of what we know now as our countries. And so a lot of the people that were there were still, um, like, I just feel like the whole deception has taken a lot longer than we would think. Like, because the law of God is written on our hearts. And I wonder how hard that is to really reprogram for the enemy. Like, it has, you really have to corrupt the minds of people, don't you? Like the way we see the internet came in, the television, like you have to kind of
Mhm.
disconnect children from their parents, you have to break up families, like you have to do a lot of destruction on a spiritual level to get people to probably get to that point where they're now denying God and all the rest of it. Because I just think the power of God on the earth after the millennial reign would have been very, very tangible,
Yeah,
Um,
what's interesting to think about it like this too is that another good evidence would be that so we have like the story of the Tower of Babel, right? So it was like the nations were coming together, or they're either willingly or being forced to come together to build this tower. And then so God confuses the languages, separates them. And then so there's not a first kind of like world empire until like Babylon based on the Daniel prophecies, right? So like this is like this monster beast that starts to take over the world. And
yeah.
then you have the next one, then you have like the Persian Empire after that, and then you have the Greek, and then you have the Roman. And so it's not till that, and obviously the prophecies say that during that last empire that there's a kingdom of God that's established, that's eternal. So that happens during the Roman Empire, which again that happened. And now we're living in a time where it's like we can see it finally coming back together, where like there's this push for a one world government. And then so like futurists will say, "Oh, this is the beast." But it's like, "Oh, well, no, but there was already a one world government." Like you realize that Rome was the one world government. So like now we're coming
Mhm.
to another day where it's like the nations are coming back together again. And it's taken this long, and there has not been a one world government since the times of Rome.
Yeah.
So I think that puts more that's another feather in the cap of like that we're heading toward a battle at the end,
Hmm.
and we need a re-established like Tower of Babel system, in order for the final judgment to come on the earth.
Yeah. I guess my perspective on the whole Roman Empire being the worldwide, uh, I guess, one world government was, I just think, now I have to do more research on this obviously, but like I suspect that the Roman narrative was a co-opt of the millennial reign. That's just my, again, it's just a total speculation. And the reason I say that is because I think a lot of the Roman narrative overlaps what would have been the millennial reign. So if you talk about like 70 AD, let's say Christ implemented the millennial kingdom at that point.
Hmm.
They need all of these Roman stories overlapping. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah. Hmm. Well, I
so
think it could be that the fact that in the same way that when God is promising the Israelites this place, and he's saying you're going to go live in places you didn't build, you're going to drink wine from vineyards you did not plant, you're going to have
yeah,
all of the things because I'm going to give you it because I'm pushing these other people out of these places. So it could be a little bit of the same thing where the the saints, the Christians who were on God's side did get access to these things, and then they probably built upon them, and that's
yeah,
maybe that's where you get like you have this Greco-Roman style, but then you also have these ridiculously ornate cathedrals
yeah,
that they're obviously are not in the same style. So maybe
exactly.
that's this. Maybe that's like the saints. They're what they have added to this already kind of advanced society. I
Yeah,
do think it's interesting again to go back again. I'm obviously I've been down the rabbit hole, so I can't stop talking about this. But it was very interesting, and I played it on my last like JT's mixtape. I was mentioning that there's this island city of Numenor, and I learned a little bit more about the Numenor mythology afterwards. But they go, this man and this elf go into this city, and they're going on this boat, and it's this totally epic city. But it's kind of like in the old world style, but it's bigger and it's grander. And there's faces carved in the rocks. There's statues. There's Roman, Greco-Roman style everywhere.
yeah.
Water everywhere. Just beautiful.
Hmm.
And then so the guy's like, when did men like me build kingdoms like this? And of course, she's like, these men are not like you. And it
Right.
was interesting, and she's explaining to that these men fought alongside the good during this great battle, and they were gifted this island. And when I learned more about the mythology, it actually said the people who fought alongside the good, they were given longer lives, they were given stronger, like higher intellects. They were average like 7 foot tall. They lived to be like
Mhm.
about 300 years old. I was like,
Wow.
that is really interesting because that is really
Interesting.
interesting because I think the one thing that I've always is really tripped me out about like a lot of the old world stuff is like the size of everything. It does
Yeah.
seem like it really does seem like the giants lived in these places because why are
Hmm.
the doors to these places like 18 feet tall?
Yeah.
It's not like they're trying to drive a truck through the front door. It's like there are
Hmm.
literally steps leading up to it, and then they got this huge door. It does seem like the people were bigger. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I leave room for the epic, like that. I have a view that it could be more spiritual, and it could be like the Romans might have built all these things, and then the tribulation, the the book of Revelation played out, and all that stuff was taken from them, and normal people lived in it as the saints reigned in heaven, or it could be like the craziest thing you could imagine and like that we just don't know about it. It is interesting. I think somebody questioned me about like the book of Isaiah saying like during this time, like almost everybody will live to be about 120. It'll be like that'll be like the minimum. Like everybody's living a longer age. And I thought that's sort of interesting that Tolkien is putting in that view that the people who fought alongside the good were given a kingdom and they were given long life and all the
Yeah.
things. And I was like, okay, now that again, I gotta do some more digging.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. And I mean, we know they leave clues in the entertainment, don't they?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
I just think Lord of the Rings is very, very cryptic in that way. Like it's trying to tell you stuff. And something I always think to myself as well. I feel nostalgic for a time that I've never lived in, and I think that's this kind of remnant. It's almost like that amnesia that you get when you see something and it feels familiar to you, but you don't know. You, you can't actually put your finger on it, but you know that it's true in a way. Like,
Mhm.
it's a reflection of reality somehow, but you just don't know how. But that's kind of how the Lord of the Rings affects me a little bit. It's
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think that is. Like, I think that there's just like there's a wonderment because you're like, "That does seem really interesting." I've always said that about, like, mythology when I first started waking up about, like, the Genesis 6 conspiracy and, like, the idea of, like, the Nephilim and, like, the heroes of old. And when I started to make the connections between, like, possibly, like, the Nephilim, like, Greek mythology, I said, "You know what? That makes more sense that the Greek mythology, there's some truth to it," because I've always thought it it does not make sense that we're still talking about it if
mhm,
it came from a completely fabricated, just fictional place. And I thought it makes more sense if it was true. And so,
yeah,
yeah, when I was learning a little bit more about Tolkien, I was like, didn't he write a language or something? And so what I was told was is that he invented a language and then he wrote these books. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense.
yeah,
It almost makes sense like that he learned to read a language and
mhm,
translate a language, and then he wrote out what he had already read, and he adapted into stories because I'm like, it's so like I said, it's so intricate that like somebody's
mhm,
imagination is not working with a team of people to come up with these stories. It's so fleshed out, and yeah, I think even like I think the kind of the Lord of the Elves was named Manwë, and I'm like, okay, that sounds a little bit similar to to
yeah.
Yahweh. Yeah, I mean, there's so much
Oh,
of it. Yeah, there's so much of it that it's like, oh my gosh, I was listening to it. I'm like,
yeah,
there's a
mhm,
lot here, and
yeah,
the problem is it's long. There's lots there, and it's almost like so
yeah.
much that I could never even. I'm gonna
I
try
mean,
that. I'm gonna look into it.
he wrote so many books. Like, it's not even the Lord of the Rings series, is it? It's like he wrote the whole Simel. I can't ever say that word.
Cimmerian, I think. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because he mentions like there's a first age, there's a second age, and there's a third age, and there's a fourth age. And it almost kind of makes sense. Like obviously the first age would be like the days of Noah type time. The second age would be, that's where the series is going now, is like the there. And then
Mm,
the third age is where you have like the movies. And I'm thinking like, so it would almost be like the first age, the days of Noah. Obviously, the second age would be after the ark to the Armageddon, and then after that, you would have like the Lord of the Rings is like taking place in maybe like the little season.
yeah.
There's actually a fourth age too, but of course, I mean, we would know that biblically there would be a time after this too.
Yeah.
So kind
Yeah.
of interesting. Could be
I
something
mean,
there.
as far as I know, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were adepts in some kind of secret society.
Yeah,
So,
they were called the Inklings.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, I mean, again, it's like that when you get to a certain level, you start to be given the actual, you know, not the truth, but it's like the truth from maybe the other side's perspective. And
Hmm.
um, yeah, so he must have known a lot of stuff by that point. And I think they were more serious back then, the secret societies. It's like they were almost setting the foundation for the next level of, you know, I want to say social programming, but um, they gave it a foundation to build on. So now we have, like you say, the movies and all that. So it's kind of adding to the lore. But
Hmm. Hmm. For
yeah,
sure.
I think that's all the questions I had. I was gonna just see if anyone in the chat had any questions. So if you have a question about, I would say specifically the preterist position or anything like that, or anything. I mean, we don't have to talk about preterism specifically, but if anyone has a question, just put question and then your question in there. And I think I had one more question actually, JT. So I think the preterists also have a view of the stone, the mill, or the stone that was thrown into the sea in Revelation 18, and they talk about that as kind of being similar to the throwing down of the old covenant, or the, you know, abolishing of the old covenant. But I think just from cataclysmic, evidence that we see, there's obviously more to it than that. Would you say that's more of a literal stone that was thrown into the sea, like a?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's the prophecies and the trumpets, and there's the burning mountain that's thrown into the sea, and I mean, obviously, it says that you just think about like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. There's going to be great death on the earth.
Yeah,
The fourth horseman is just like the pale horse, and it's like there's mass death. And I would, like I said, I feel like did this, and I think in the same way that you can't say everybody who believes in the little season has the exact same view. So I'm not going to say everybody believes like this, but I do believe that a lot of preterists, what they likely have done is they believed based on Matthew 24, and they believed on the works of Josephus that Jesus told the truth, and they can't explain everything else. So I think they've attempted to explain things without actually researching like us in the little season have.
yeah,
So to me, it seems very obvious this was a real physical event on the earth. Obviously, I believe that it's kind of like, you know, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So there's spiritual things happening that we probably can't see. Like maybe even like I know that I think Bible scribe, he mentioned that like he believed the battle of Armageddon was more of a spiritual thing. Like the frogs pouring out of the false prophet and the beast mouth, they're being funneled in this place. And it's like so Jesus and the armies of God are making right like this battle versus the corrupt heavenly host. Meanwhile, there's actually physical battles happening with the men too. So it's like it's
yeah,
there's things that are happening in heaven, there's things that are happening on earth. But when the Bible says all these people are going to die on the earth, then I believe that obviously all these people are going to die. And
yeah.
through the research that obviously if you guys have not seen, Paul and I did that breakdown of Gunnar Heinzen's lectures about this cataclysm in the first millennia that many had historians had tried to make it like it's three different periods of the first millennia, but he's saying it's one. I I was really tripped out when I first watched that thing because when he shows the pictures of Rome from like or illustrations of Rome from like the 15 and 1600s, and it's literally covered in mud, and I'm like, oh my gosh, so there's your mud flood, there's your
Yeah,
whatever happened then, and when you hear that, like literally, there's hundreds of Roman villas in towns under a swamp now. So here's where all this sediment had covered over there. He showed at one point that there was a Roman port that was now 4 kilometers inland. So
hmm,
there's a port that's no longer at the sea.
yeah,
I've wondered too, like there's a good example in that Fort Jefferson. I did a video about that, about how there's this star fort out in kind of the Gulf of Mexico that's got 16 million bricks and it's just so ornate and
yeah,
it's got no fresh water there. A lot of people in the comments, I think, rightly speculated, what if that was not in the middle of the ocean
yes,
at when they built it?
yeah.
What if it was on the coast? And so there's lots of evidence. There's so many examples of evidence that our coastlines are different than they used to be. There's things that are
Oh yeah,
underwater. There's so many things that are underwater. So like in the last 1,000 years, obviously if we don't believe that there's been 2,000 years, there's a good chance that the landscape has changed. So I believe that however it happened, if God sent something from heaven down to here, the oceans were in turmoil, the lands were in turmoil, a third of the sea life died, a third became deserts, a third became scorched earth. We have we have done a pretty good job at this point of pointing out that there is historical scientific evidence that those things happened. And I think
yeah,
it points to, like I said, even just going back to like when we first did that video about 536 AD, it mentioned that there was this 18 months of darkness, and then it was followed up by like the bubonic plague, which they speculated up to up to 90% of the population could have died of this plague.
yeah,
Okay, so you're talking about times of darkness, war, plague, famine, all those
yeah,
things. And if you put this closer to the times of Jesus, I don't think anybody's even arguing
yeah.
that. did that happen? But and I think that that's what and unbelievably, that's what Gunnar Heinzen basically was speculating is like, here's the reason why we date things Anno Domini is because the people who lived after that, they only knew they lived past the times of Jesus and they dated things backwards. It was like the
Yeah,
only history book they had. And so
yeah,
therefore they dated everything based on what the Bible said. I think that's quite remarkable. And I think it makes all the sense in the world.
yeah. I agree, and I just think that God gives us. God doesn't like. I think it gives the enemy too much credit to kind of say that you can't look at historical evidence and say, oh, this actually happened. Like, I think, or even, geological evidence or whatever you want to say. Like, I think God allows these things to become evidence for us of what happened, so that we're not totally in the dark, right? Like, we still have a chance to figure it out. Did you ever see this? This is in Oregon, and this is a uh, it's a beach now, but it used to be a forest.
Oh, wow.
So these are trees that actually are on the beach in Oregon.
That's pretty crazy looking. That's very eerie.
Yeah. So, and then I don't know if I can get a close up on that. Oh, yeah. So let's look at this one here. So if you, I'm going to try and click that open. Um,
Yeah, there's certainly just anecdotally and just physical, I mean, like pictures and evidence of like this place experienced a massive cataclysm at some point.
right?
I
Yeah. So there's an actual forest here that is now in the ocean. And that looks to me like it was part of the land. And now it's just sitting abandoned like a little island. But you can see because it's all just chopped off around the edges.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's I've never seen that. Thanks for sharing that. That's cool. I'll have to do
Yeah.
some more research into that.
Nisqually
That's
Beach in
so
Oregon.
bizarre.
I know. It's like, it's kind of, I don't know, creepy. But yeah, I shared that on one of my lives recently. I just thought of it when you were saying about like the port that's now like out. Is it further inland now, as you said?
Yeah, they were they
Yeah.
he was the interesting part is he was saying like that based on I guess where the water is, they would have said if a tidal wave would have came, like it would have changed the sediment into a certain way. But he said, but it was bigger on both sides. Like there was
Yeah.
evidence that it happened on both sides. So like it was like everything had been changed. And it's interesting like that when I'm not saying this is necessarily wrong, but it is a lot of for a lot of reasons people talk about sea life being on certain mountains and things like that. And people have always assumed as Christians they would say that must have been happened in the days of Noah, but it's like it doesn't necessarily mean it was in the days of Noah. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like we just know that there's like fossils and things like that in places they don't really belong, like sea life, even
Yeah.
like in like the like in the Sahara Desert. She's like, so when was that not a desert like that? Like
I
when did
know.
that have sea life in there?
And actually, something about sand makes me think that the sand was brought up off the bottom of the ocean. Like,
No, for sure. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think
yeah,
that even like I've I think a lot of people have thought the same thing. And I know that it mentions, I think in the book of Genesis, that the land of Egypt was not a desert. It was like
no,
it was a plush place. So it's like obviously now it's in a kind of a terrible spot. It's like the idea that some people built pyramids in that desert.
yeah,
No, there's better places to build that stuff, like wherever you want to live. So it
yeah,
seems like the landscape has certainly changed over the years. And
yeah,
to what level? I've often wondered, like, yeah, that you see maps and maps are different, but they're very detailed. So it's kind of like that. It's sort of weird to me that some photographer made a very detailed map that's completely wrong. What if it was more like that? And I saw an interesting video about Australia. Like the southern coast of Australia looks like cliffs. It literally looks like it broke off of something else.
yeah,
I think there's a lot of examples of that, and I mean, and it's hard to know what this place looked like before.
yeah,
And I'm one of those people who do believe that the place they call Israel now, I think that was likely the Israel from the Bible. but I do think that it could be way different looking. Some of the
Yeah.
places around it could be different. I mean, the people have often said that the there's really only one mountain there, even though there's multiple mountains mentioned in the book of, in the Bible in
Hmm.
Israel. Like the the seas look like lakes, the rivers look like creeks there. It's something's different about it. But in the same way, like that place obviously doesn't resemble what it used to. But I still think like
Yeah.
based on like some of the archaeological finds, it does make sense that some of that stuff was there. But yeah, we really
Yeah.
do have to rely on the history books, which we do not believe anymore, to say like what really happened. And obviously the history books, we realize the more we read them is they're incomplete when you go
Yeah.
back to like the first century or whenever that century was.
Yeah. It's really hard to find any resources that are like before the 1500s. Like they're all sequestered away somewhere. Probably the Vatican or somewhere like that. Uh, what is it called? Library of Congress.
Yeah, well, even that, even the Vatican. Obviously, I've long wondered, and it could be there could be some really good evidence of all the things we're talking about in the Vatican libraries. But at the same time, even what I mean, historically, what we're taught is that there was this great fire in Rome. That we even taught about the fire of Alexandria in Egypt, and so there's multiple times, which obviously I believe could actually be the same event, that
Hmm.
all these records of Rome burnt up. And so, like, maybe there was more fragments found of like the things that were, but it's like in the same way that they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, like sort of recently, right? And
Yeah.
it proved the biblical text was correct. But I think that's probably like true about a lot of things. It's like that they literally were digging places out and they did find records of older things. But like you can imagine if they did find records that showed something did not fit the timeline that we've been taught, they would never tell us.
Hmm.
That would never be released to us. I was like, guess what? We've got it all wrong. It's like I always think about like the story of like Indiana Jones. It's like they find the lost ark, and then so what does the U.S. government do with it? They stick it in a gigantic warehouse. They would never let anyone know if they ever found it. So like if they ever did
Yeah.
find evidence that there was an advanced civilization recently, the Romans were way more advanced, way more the empire was way broader, they would never say anything about it. They would just
Yeah.
continue to say, "We already know everything, so don't worry about it. Don't even bother to ask."
Yeah. I mean, I'm tracking down in my Sides of the North series. I'm tracking down, and honestly, like I had no really preconceived notions of where anything was. I just went with a kind of a open perspective, and I just started looking at old maps, started looking at old documents, but referring always back to the Bible. And something I noticed in the Bible is that geography is always mentioned. Like whether it's a mountain, whether it's a plain, whether it's a big body of water, great sea, river, whatever it is. And then
Mhm.
there will be names associated with these, right? So I'm kind of using the Bible as a map, but throwing out all preconceived notions. I don't personally believe that the location that they say is Israel is actually Israel. I don't think it's anywhere near, but I was willing to be wrong as well, right?
Mhm.
So that's been a really interesting study for me. But I think just if you're going to deceive the whole world, you're going to change pretty much everyone's perception of where anything is, what time anything happened, like where you're supposed to be, like
Mhm.
it's all just going to be confusing. And I do think it helped that the earth probably changed. There was this cataclysm, so it was almost an opportunity for them to start rewriting some stuff. But I know Jason Jack just did a recent video on the Pangea, and I kind of am drawn to that. That's quite interesting to me. Just to,
Mhm.
like you said, there's how things kind of fit together, and you can't really deny the fact that if you
Middle
just move
Earth.
yeah, move everything over the water again, it would all kind of fit together.
Yeah,
So
Middle Earth is it's funny, like, if you see
yeah,
those Tolkien maps, it was like, yeah, there's the middle part, and there's the western shores and all this stuff that are across the sea, and there's seas around that.
yeah,
I thought that was really interesting. The reason I do go back to saying, like, that I think that the locations in general are similar is because, like, if you think about the journeys of Paul and the seas, the voyages they went on and the places in Greece and Turkey that they went, they're all kind of close together, so it's kinda like that they did sail to these places, so they're kind of all in that same region,
Mm,
and obviously that there are some of the oldest stuff. I do believe that where North America is, there might have been something else though, like that something we don't even really know about. Because I mean, if you really think about like the story of the Bible is just the story of Jesus, and it's like it is focused on this area because
yeah.
of the promises. So like, what happened outside that area? I mean, lots of
Mhm,
things. A lot of things happen outside that
yeah.
area, and I do think that yeah, there might have been even some older, crazier stuff that happened here that we have no idea about. Actually, I'm pretty sure that there was just because the history they're telling about this place is so recent and it's the
Yeah.
earth is way older than that.
I guess just briefly though, like on the Paul thing, on his journeys, he talks about sailing along the coast of Asia. And it's like a 14-day journey and it's a huge boat. And they even shipwreck, right? So on some islands and
Well,
stuff.
they're going in winter time too, and I think I remember reading that, and it was like when they're showing where they're going, it was
Yeah.
like that they had to stop and they couldn't continue to sail. But yeah, like I don't know. I guess I'm
So
leaving the room open, but I remember my buddy did a video and he was like, okay, so if Israel's not where Israel is, he was actually talking about Egypt. People saying America is Egypt, and he's like, okay, but the Egyptians didn't call Egypt Egypt. The Greeks called it Egypt. And then
yeah,
so the Greeks had a queen that went there named Cleopatra. And so where's Greece at if Egypt is in America? And I
yeah,
thought, you know what? That's a pretty fair question. And if you can't really identify where that is, I mean, yeah, we could just throw it all out and we could say it's all backwards.
yeah,
But I think at that point, it's kind of like it really makes it hard for us to do any kind of real research if we have to throw out even the map and the whole thing, which I know a lot of people in the Little Season community just say, "I don't believe any of it, and I'm just gonna make it up as I go." And
yeah.
I don't want it to do that. I wanna be able to say, like, I'm trying to do the best with what we have. Because if I disregard every bit of everything, well,
Hmm.
then what's the point of even trying to research? Because it's just kinda like now we're just
Yeah.
talking weird speaking a different language.
Well, I'll just tell you this. So up in the northeastern Siberia region, okay,
Mhm.
you've got the tribe of Dan on a map. You've got Naphtali on a map, and they're both coastal regions. You've got
Interesting.
Mount Tabor. You've got the Bay of Transfiguration, the Bay of the Holy Cross. You have two ship routes that actually say St. Paul and St. Peter on them. You've got
Mhm.
Mount St. Elijah, Mount St. John. You've got Bethel in Alaska. You've got Elam, Alaska. Like there's so much in that area. Like if there's any video anybody watches of mine, I do a recap of 1, 2, and 3 of that series, and then the fourth series, the fourth video really reveals a lot, and I have so much more coming as well, like in number 6 of that series, which I'm going to do next. Like honestly, I can't even tell you. There's Okay, so you know where the gold rush is, the area of the gold rush up in the Yukon, Alaska region. There's a Mount Solomon dome there, which was the center of all the gold. And basically
Hmm.
there was a very short period of time where that was all available. Bill Gates and Donald Trump were both um, inheritors of the gold from that region. So their grandfathers were both part of the original families that were involved in that region when all the gold was found.
Mhm.
That's also where the Polaris is. So that's Fairbanks, Alaska. Um, and so like there's just a lot of like really almost undeniable like draw to that area where you're like, huh. And did you know British Columbia used to have camels? Like,
I did not know that, no.
yeah, I found this out as part of my research. There's so much. Like I'm like every time I look at it, I'm uncovering like new things. I'm like, when is this going to stop? But it's very interesting. And then I've been also tracking the cataclysms in that region. So that whole northern region is covered in cataclysms.
Yeah, I know that
And
Paul talked about that once that there was like it looks like there was all kinds of holes and weird kind of things up in like the
Yeah,
Siberian region. It's like it's I've seen I think it was John Levi did a video and he's talking about the
yeah.
scarring on that on the earth in that area.
It's pretty
Definitely
intense.
weird.
Yeah. And even in the northern Alaska region, there's this Bering National Park, and they have these huge ancient monuments, like that are just all throughout the hills there. Like it's crazy. But anyway, just to say, like if the north was, let's say, where Jerusalem was, and which some people believe, right, which was the
Mhm.
original Jerusalem, you've got the Black Rock there, and they're obviously hiding the north from us because the old maps show that there's land there. And
Mhm.
so you've got the international date line that goes right down there, which is basically a strait of water that goes straight into the north. There's just, yeah, a lot of geological kind of, um, I would say, alignment, and not to mention maps showing so much indication of that region as being like a biblical area.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I just think if also they wanted to get people to look in completely the wrong place, they could easily plant archaeological evidence in that region. Even if it was real evidence, they could still transfer it, right?
Mhm. Yeah, no,
So,
I think there could be a mix of that. I also think that just because we have again, if I'm leaning strongly toward the Gunnar Heinsohn kind of nailed that whole thing, that some people might have concluded certain places are where they are not because of they were trying to deceive, it's because they really don't know. Like they're doing their best with what they had learned and they
yeah,
tried to do their best to identify when and where. And
yeah,
obviously they could have some issues with that. I guess that's the thing is like that it's really hard to for people to accept that the history and science and all the things were that blind. But I think that when he speculated up to 90% of the world had died during this time, like
yeah,
really think about that. Like that's like so what would you know outside of like I said, and I think that's the interesting part is like and it makes sense that some people would say, oh, the Bible copied off these older texts, something like Billy Carson. But the Bible is really the best, oldest history book we've got.
yeah.
Like by far.
I
And it's
know.
like, so why didn't any of these other books last?
Yeah,
Like I think you know why. Like I would think we all know why. We'd all give you a good answer why. But it's like because otherwise there would be lots of older history books because yeah, like we know that Moses doesn't go back further than lots of other history, but like that was preserved somehow.
yeah,
I think it's really interesting. And I think that so I think that so much of what we do know is based on people after that cataclysm saying they did their best to come up with a timeline. And they also probably did their best to say, well, this is here. So I wonder if this is here. Like I don't even know. Like I don't know. I really don't know.
yeah. It's hard to know, and we'll probably never know truly. But yeah, we're almost at 2 hours, so I don't want to keep you any longer. I know it's later where you are, so I want to thank you for coming on, JT, again. And
Of course.
yeah, I just hope all's going well in your area, and I hope everyone that's been chatting has had a insightful time with us here. And I have a video coming out on Friday. Have you got anything coming out recently, or you want to point anyone to?
No, like I said, obviously, if you guys had not seen it, I know Paul and I did that breakdown on his channel on a live stream this past week. I broke it down in 3 parts. I added a few little things in there. If you guys had already watched it, I had watched some of his other podcasts, and I put in some nuggets that gave some clarifications on things and some little new treats. And yeah, I mean, I'm just myself. I'm just been working on like the mixtape series, so like I'm kind of just give me something to talk about and then
Yeah,
until we find out more. But obviously my heart is in this research about the little season, so the more I find out, but I don't want to be just kind of like I don't want to just be I've done a million podcasts now where I've like people ask me, hey, let's talk about the little season. I've been repeating this and everyone's like, oh,
yeah,
you're going to talk about something else. So I will, but I
yeah,
want to the more I learn about the little season and more evidence of this stuff, that's what I'm going to focus on. So
yeah.
yeah.
And I'm actually working through that video that you did with Paul. I just haven't got enough into it to kind of hear your takes. So I am working through it, but it's good so far. So
Well, thank you.
yeah, and I enjoy the mixtapes too because those are such easy, like kind of almost entertaining to listen to, where it's not like just entertainment. You're kind of also like learning, but it's a good mixture. So
Well, yeah, that's my whole thought process is that like that I'm sure everybody who's listened to me on podcasts, it's like I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, so I kind of know a lot about like lots of or a little bit about a lot of things. And so like I know that the same thing, like I'm sure people watch videos, I watch videos, and we have a lot to say about, I have a lot to say about like lots of different things, and I think it's given us the ability. And of course, if I do have my way, anything that pops into my feed, it's old world, like possibly hidden technology, lost lands, and obviously anything that relates to the Millennial Kingdom.
yeah,
Obviously, that will always get pushed to the front of the line. But anything else besides that, it's just like there's a lot to talk about. So I think
yeah,
that this
and
gives me the opportunity to talk about all of it.
it's nice you have demon erasers on who isn't always of the same kind of view of things because
Yeah.
it keeps it interesting, right?
Yeah, like I
So
said, sometimes we need to bounce it off people who don't think the same way we do. Like I said, and me and
yeah,
Brian are like, he's from California, I'm from Virginia. I'm probably about 10 years older than he is, and just the fact that yeah, we can kind of disagree and we can laugh about things, and he can have the kookiest positions about certain things, and he just
yeah,
trips me out sometimes. But it's all kind of like in brotherly, friendly love. So I hope people
yeah.
get that, and I hope that people do learn from that. That no, it's not. Not everybody's a shill if they don't agree exactly like you do, and
Agreed.
we can. And yeah, I've changed my mind about things. Actually, I've convinced Brian about different things. And funny enough, it's like as different as we are, he was the one who probably first came to me about like, I think the things in the Revelation have happened before. So it's funny, like that he was actually
Oh,
one of the first ones who like, and I said, you know what, people have been saying that. And I'm thinking like, and me and him were bouncing things up. And it wasn't, we both at the same time basically came to that conclusion, like independently without trying to convince each other.
that's cool.
So it's pretty cool. So like it's kind of like that different roads kind of converge, and despite our differences, we do have, you know, come to
Yeah.
similar conclusions at the end.
Well, that's the Holy Spirit for you.
I believe so. I believe
It
so.
gets us there
Amen.
all together, right? Yeah.
For sure.
Well, have a good night, JT. Thanks again. And
Of course.
bye,
God
everyone in the
bless.
chat.
God
Okay.
bless all you guys in the chat. See you guys soon.
Take care. Okay. I think